Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Victoria Hailova, and I'm the project manager for British Council English and School Education team. And currently, I manage the ENCOURSE project. Before we start, I just wanted to say that your safety is our #1 priority. So please make sure that in case of a raid alert, you take care of yourself and your loved ones first. And then if you feel like there is a chance to rejoin this meeting, you may do so. If not, there will be the recording of this meeting. The same applies to the power outages. The situation is dense for all of us. So in case of the power outage in your region or just in your group, you will have a chance to listen to this recording later. Please do not stress out about this. So just a couple of words about what we are doing in English and School Education team with the New Ukrainian School reform support. British Council in Ukraine started to support the ministry with the New Ukrainian School reform back in 2017. We started with a primary school, and more than 18,000 teachers were trained during that time. Then we swiftly moved to the basic school and offered the English in New Context course on the online teacher community platform. I'm sure a lot of you took part in that course as well. And finally, we are here with our response to the upper secondary school reform that kicks off really soon in 2027, and mediation competence is among those competencies that the students should understand how to deal with and in upper secondary school. So this is our response to the upper secondary reform. And within the ENCOURSE project, we've already trained around 1,000 teachers, which is a great result. And today we've announced the open call for the 4th cohort. So I'm very optimistic and happy that more teachers could benefit from this opportunity if they choose to do so, which means that more students will have a chance to benefit from this as well, and get ready to the real life, expand the real life situations and to what is expecting them outside the borders of the classroom. So the topic of our webinar will be mostly concentrated on differentiation for the mixed ability groups and assessment. Why have we chosen this topic? Mostly it was based on the feedback from you. A lot of you in your post-course feedback mentioned that these topics are something that you'd like to explore deeper. So here we are. And I want to introduce to you Chris Cotterill, the consultant of the ENCOURSE project and the author of the ENCOURSE materials, who will be delivering this webinar for you today. Hi, Chris, and over to you.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much, Vika. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be able to address you online like this. And yeah, as Vika has said, because a lot of the feedback which you gave indicated that you wanted more focus on differentiation and assessment. So let's revisit those topics and have another look at those. Okay. Okay, so this is what we're looking at today. I want to just say about any questions that you've got. I really want to answer all questions that you might have. But today we're just focusing on differentiation and assessment. Okay, so those questions, I mean, put any questions you want in the chat. If there are questions about differentiation and assessment, I'll try and answer them today if we've got time. Otherwise, I'll try and send out like a mass email and answer any other questions you've got. Now, I want you to be like thinking for yourself as you follow in the webinar. So if you see a pink box, like the one like 2/3 the way down the screen there, I want you to, there'll be a question. So you think about your answer to the question. You can put it in your answer in the chat box, or if maybe you don't want to answer in the chat box, you can just write your answer down, okay? Just a quick sort of guide to where we're going in course of differentiation. So there were a couple of ideas covered on the course. Talked about let students choose which medium to ask or decide the content of a task. So I think they're worthwhile ideas, but having looked at the course, I couldn't really think of anything to add. So we're not going to revisit those today. We're going to have a quick look at adding more challenge to an activity for more capable learners and adding scaffolding to activities to make them more achievable. And then there's going to be some new ideas, okay? All right. Now, you received an email. I think that's right, isn't it, Vika? So you've received an email.
That's correct.
With a lesson, Public Buildings of the Future. Hopefully, quite soon there will be like a resource pack of 10 lessons available to you, which have all been produced by people who participated in the ENCOURSE, and they've been edited a little bit and they'll be uploaded. And I'm really enthusiastic about that. I'm excited because I know that sometimes this mediation teaching, it's a new thing. So I think it's going to be great to have some lessons ready to go that everyone will have access to. So this is one sample of them, Public Buildings of the Future. You can see the names of the Ukrainian heroes who wrote this lesson for you. And let's have a little look. So at the task first, design a public building for the future. What do you think will be different in the future? Will the purpose of your building evolve over the next 50 years? How will your building be different to suit the needs and possibilities of the future? And there's an instruction for the teacher to write some future language forms on the board, just to give some guidance for the students. So that's the task. That's the main, like the center of the lesson, okay? Because it's a task-based lesson. So the pre-task was just to think about schools. What were schools like 50 years ago? What will schools be like 50 years in the future? And to show some pictures of public buildings and elicit the purpose of each building. Okay. What comes later in the lesson, there's a gallery walk. So each public building which has been designed will be posted up around the walls, and the students can go around and look at the other buildings. In this case, one student from each group stays with the design, so they'll have some interaction as well with somebody who was part of the group who designed it. And then they're looking for the answers to these questions. Which groups had a similar idea? And if you could visit any of the group's buildings, which would you visit? Okay. So after they've done that, they've done the task, they've looked at each other's buildings, and they've reported. So they basically sort of completed the task at this stage, and then comes the analysis. Now, all these analysis questions focus on like how mediation, basically. During the analysis stage, you can also focus on language, but for this lesson, all the suggested questions are about mediation. Oh, the last one there. How confident do you feel using grammatical forms to talk about the future in English? So that's about language. And then the follow-up, which is students write a paragraph about how schools will be different 50 years from now. So they can do that for homework, right? Basically building on what they've done in the lesson. Okay, so we've had a look at that one sample lesson. Now I'm going to take out 3 parts, so the task, the report, and the follow-up. Now, if you sort of put yourself in the situation, imagine you're in the class. You're in the class and one group has finished this stage. Or, for example, it might be that you are planning this lesson in advance and you are perhaps planning to put the students into differentiated groups, okay? Maybe you have 5 groups in your class and you're going to put all the stronger, more outspoken students together. So think about for a moment, I'll give you a moment to think. Can you think of how you could have an extension task for any of these stages? Remember, you can write your answer down for yourself or put it in the chat box. I'll also say you don't need to come up with 3 ideas. If you just come up with 1 extension for one of the stages, that's great. Okay, we're getting a few ideas there. I particularly like this one from, oh, sorry, they're moving so fast. From Victoria, give them the idea about convenience for disabled people. Right. So, so you've designed a building and now you could just give them slips of paper, say a wheelchair user or partially sighted person. How would you make sure your building could be used by that person. That's really good. Oh, I like this one from Olga as well. Pitch your building to the future city council. Okay. Come up with a way of sort of selling your idea. Okay. And Zoya said, take environmental concerns into account. Okay, great. Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Now I'll just share a few ideas I came up with, but you don't need to think that like my ideas are the right ones. Actually, the ideas you've come up with are very valid, just as good. Okay, so for the task, I put maybe invent a new job for somebody in the building, or invent 2 new words which will be needed in the future in this area of life. So, you know, like with the internet, new words are cropping up all the time, right? Like Google is a verb, which just means to search for something. So I thought it might be fun if they made up their own word. Report. Look, which areas of life do you think will be better in the future? So they could also discuss that. Some areas of life might get better, some areas of life might get worse, you know, like nutrition might get better, but family life might get worse. And for the follow-up, you know, as well as writing about schools of the future, they could also write about what could we be doing now to prepare for the future. Now, it's sort of up to you, I guess, in terms of your teaching style. Do you want to plan this sort of thing in advance? This is something I was thinking about. I think some teachers, well, if we're thinking about how to group the students, right? If you're planning to put all the strongest students together in one group, for example, then I think it can be a good idea to plan some of these activities because it's predictable that one group is going to finish more quickly. But also, you know, I'm going to try and give you a tip in a minute so that you can come up with them on the spot if you need them, right? Okay, now let's have a look at scaffolding. So this is just a couple of suggestions I've got for how you could make the task more achievable. So the original task said, write some language forms up on the board, right? So future forms. Maybe you call it future simple, future continuous, future perfect. Maybe if you want to make the task more achievable, you could write like sentences which are half finished like this. So the students have just got to slot their ideas into the sentences. It might be a bit more achievable for them to do that rather than coming up with their own ideas from scratch. So that's about the language. Or in terms of the task, I thought you could actually put some key phrases from the mediation competency companion guide up on the board. So the students actually know how you are expecting them to interact, right? Okay. This is another thing I thought for scaffolding. You can always just make each question a little bit more limited, right? A little bit more finite. Perhaps not giving them so open a choice, but just giving them a binary choice, a choice between the two things. So instead of saying, how did you solve the disagreements? You could just say, what did you say to solve the disagreements? That might use simpler language, right? If you think about it, if you say, How did you solve the disagreement? Oh, we talked to each other, we mediated, we asked each other to clarify the position. So that's quite complicated language, whereas if the task is just what did you say, then they can say, for example, I said, I don't understand, which is actually simpler. They don't need to use reported speech. They don't need to know any verbs for how they're interacting or anything like that, do you see? And then instead of saying, was your group optimistic or pessimistic about the future, you could perhaps just ask, will healthcare be better or worse in the future? So they haven't got to think about all areas of life. They're only thinking about one area of life. Okay, so these are some things, some ideas for making a task more achievable. Right, Bloom's taxonomy. I don't know. I think, do you love it or do you hate it? I think some people, I think it can be useful. Some people get the feeling like they've been beaten over the head with it. But I wanted to maybe share an idea for if you haven't planned your extension activities in advance, or if you haven't planned your scaffolding strategies in advance, maybe you could just think in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, right? So I'm taking this question here. This is from the reporting stage. If you could visit one of the other group's buildings in person, which would you like to visit? Okay. If you could visit one of the other group's buildings in person, which would you like to visit? So where does that fit onto Bloom's taxonomy? And you could argue different things here. I think it broadly fits into the analyze band, okay? Because it's like relate. I think that's the verb which fits it better, relate, because it's about you. How does it relate to you? Okay? So if we think in terms of that, I'm going to show you Bloom's taxonomy again, just for a little moment in a second. But here's the task. Could you create another gallery walk question which is higher or lower on Bloom's taxonomy, right? So now put yourself in the situation. Try and imagine yourself in the situation. You're teaching this lesson. All your groups have designed their lessons, and you've got now you're doing the gallery walk, and this is the task. The groups are supposed to be going around looking at the pictures. If you could visit one of the other groups' buildings in person, which would you like to visit? But let's say there's one group who are finding it much too easy. They're getting a little bit bored because they're not challenged enough. And then you've got one group who are finding it too challenging. Now, let's just go back then. So have a look at Bloom's taxonomy and just pick one of the higher levels or lower levels and maybe just pick one of the verbs or think about how could you create an easier or a more challenging activity using Bloom's taxonomy. Feel free to put your answers in the chat box. Okay, so I can see that Anne and Tatiana at least have come up with basically the same idea I was going to suggest, which is ask you to defend your choice, right? At the evaluate stage, it says all things like argue, defend. So even if you just add explain your reasoning, that's already a higher level task. I like Olga's idea as well. What make one change to the design to make it more suitable for life 50 years from now. Yeah, that's good. And then also, this one's really interesting too from Olga. Give your opinions for an additional use of this building. That's really good. I like that. Yeah, these are great. Thank you, Elena. And then Olga's also got a suggestion for something lower. What is the main purpose of the building? Summarize it in one sentence. So that would maybe just be at the understand level, right? All they've got to do is understand the purpose of the building. Good. Okay. We've also got the suggestion, make a list of public buildings you know. Yeah, that's probably just like remember at the very bottom stage. Okay, great. Well, this is a good one. Is that Yevgenia? What could you say to convince the city council to invest money in the building? Wow, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, I like it. What feelings will you get while standing there? That's great. I would say it is quite difficult, maybe. Actually, what Victoria said, she said, what feelings will you get while standing there? That's almost at the top level, isn't it? Create. Because you're asking them to sort of get a little bit artistic, a little bit aesthetic with their thinking. It's quite difficult to do the create stage without just designing another task, right? But most of the ideas people have come up with are at the evaluate stage. That's really good. There's not so many ideas at the lower stages, the lower levels, but we've got some ideas. Okay, great. Okay, so the idea which I came up with for a lower level activity would be just a sort of a categorizing activity. Which of the buildings are for leisure or which would you need in an emergency? So they haven't even got to like make whole sentences to explain their ideas. They've just got to know, sort them into categories. Is it yeah, business, pleasure, administration, or what? Okay. All right, now we're getting on to another subject now, giving roles for group work. Now, there are all sorts of different roles that you could give to group members. And I just wanted to talk about the fact that, so before we were talking about extension activities for maybe a stronger group, right? When we're thinking in terms of roles, this is also applicable if you're just going to do like mixed ability groups, but then they can also be suitable for if you're grouping the students together of similar ability, but maybe they've got different learning styles or different personalities, different aptitudes. Okay. So what I'd like you to do, if that's okay, is come up with some ideas for roles, but maybe also think about what kind of a student would you want to give that role to? So if I just give an obvious one, so often one that people come up with is note taker, right? But which student is a suitable student to be the note taker? Because if you choose one of the more outspoken students, then the advantage of being the note taker is that they have to listen to the other students in order to take the notes, right? Or if you choose one of the weaker students, it kind of provokes them to ask for clarification from the other group members, right? In order to make sure they understand everything that the group is saying. Okay, so give me your ideas then in the chat, or just write them down for yourself. What kind of roles could you assign in group work? Now, I'm getting plenty of ideas for the roles, but I also want you to think about how would you give the roles out? Okay, so for example, I like the timekeeper. What kind of student do you think you would give that role to? Okay, so people are saying weaker student, a less confident or shy student. Why? Oh, this is a good answer as well. Responsible and calm student. An attentive student. Okay. Organized. An organized student for the timekeeper. Okay. Alexandra says, a student who is struggling with speaking but is organized and responsible. Now, I'm really interested in this one. Mary, you've said the one with the worst behavior. Would you like to say why did you answer that, Mary? You can either answer in the chat or unmute yourself. Why do you say the one with the worst behavior? Let's see if Mary's going to answer. While I was thinking about this the other day, and I asked ChatGPT, right, what roles it could come up with for an ELT lesson. And one it came up with, which I really liked, was fact checker. I think that would be a really good idea, especially in this day and age. You know, you could think about all the students are having a debate. Maybe it's one student's role to sit there with the phone and actually check whether the things people are saying are true or not. I thought that was a great idea. Mary has replied, she says, so we're talking about why would the worst behaved student be the timekeeper? She says it'll discipline him or her and give him or her a sense of self-importance. Yeah, great. So thank you, Mary. Yeah, so if you can give them the responsibility, which is kind of like one moment. You can make them responsible for everybody else for the improvement you want to see in themselves. Maybe it will make them think along those lines. Okay, brilliant. Well done, Mary. Just while we're thinking about roles, I did want to say as well that it can be a good idea to rotate the roles and give people a different role each time. And also, don't forget about like being gender responsive in the way that you do this. Sometimes, especially if you let the students choose their own roles, sometimes they quite often choose a girl as the note taker and then like a boy to be the spokesperson. So you have to make sure that doesn't happen and that there's a rotation, you know, that the roles get rotated among the genders. Okay. Oh, I like this one from Olga. She says materials manager. Yeah, especially if you've got a task which involves like a map or some leaflets or some pieces of paper or roll cards. Okay, now we're about halfway through. Let me see. No, we're not yet halfway through. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask about differentiation at this point? If you've got any questions, you can share them in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you want to unmute. Don't worry, Victoria, we're going on to assessment next, okay? Okay, so let me see. Anna said, how can we evaluate each role correctly? I would say that the roles that you give the student don't really affect, for example, the learning objectives of the lesson. Okay, so when you're evaluating how well the student has done in each lesson, you should be looking back at the learning objective. What were they supposed to achieve out the lesson? So if you've given them a task like designing the building and one student takes the role of timekeeper, it's like the timekeeper is a secondary role, really. The mediation and the language use are what they're primarily doing. Okay, so you don't need separate evaluation criteria for each role. Ola says, what if all the groups are not confident and need scaffolding? Well, I think that's just a question. That's just a question of knowing your class. I think you don't. When you open up the materials to have a look, you don't necessarily have to teach the lesson exactly as it's written. You should always think about your students and what support that they need. You know what they've done in the past and what areas they're strong in, what kind of activities they're likely to respond well to. So don't feel you have to teach the lesson exactly as it's written down. You can always give them more support or more challenge. If the class is more or less the same level, students do not always like being given different tasks. Well, yeah, so don't differentiate it then. Or just differentiate based on the content, you know, let them choose the building and then don't differentiate further. That's good for you. Are we to differentiate marks for the levels? Does it mean the weak learners won't get high marks? Well, that's a good question, but we're going on to assessment next. So just hold fire with that one, Lyubov, and hopefully that'll be answered later. Okay. Look, I'll tell you what, save your questions now, and then let's continue on to assess. Oh, sorry, I can see a hand raised. Zoya. Zoya, do you want to unmute yourself?
I can unmute. Well, the question is, I want to tell a bit about differentiation, how to differ the tasks in the groups. For example, ask them to choose their roles on their own, not just to a point, but again, they may unleash their power within, and we do know everything about the person, about the student. Maybe they seized something inside their self, their mind. They want to do this activity and want to be the group member and be responsible for some activities we never thought of. So let them choose. That's number one. As for differentiation, just let them choose their roles on their own and prove. As for evaluation, after all, I would ask students in the end of their work in the group to evaluate their own input into the final, and also to tell feedback about each other, saying what input was of my group member that makes our project be top, be the first class, be successful, or there were some challenges, and why. To just to analyze. If our students analyze their participation, so then next time they will choose the role, they will be more serious to activities and to support each other, like in the honeybee house, when everybody is responsible. Somebody is working for, the other is a queen, and the third one is a drone, probably not working very hard. So their participation is a great job when they analyze on their own, not necessarily the teacher. That's it, my what I wanted to tell.
Brilliant. Yeah, great, Zoya. That's good, actually. That's worth saying. The roles don't have to be dictated by the teacher, and in fact, and they don't even need to be labeled really necessarily. So if you, again, it's just a case of knowing your students. So if you have a class where you can sort of trust them to get on with the task, maybe you could even have that as your assessment stage. You could, for example, have 3 archetypes, like the leader, the clarifier, and the summarizer, or say something like that. Now, you don't give them the roles, you don't ask them to choose the roles. Maybe they do the task, and then when you get to the analysis stage, maybe you give them these 3 types, archetypes, and you let them analyze. When you were doing the task, what role did you take? Does it fit any of these archetypes? If it doesn't fit, why? What did you do? But yeah, well done, Zoya. I think you've got the idea of mediation, to be honest, from the way you're talking. I like that. Okay, brilliant. Let's keep going now. Let's talk a little bit about analysis, and then if you've got any questions, if you've got questions about analysis, or if you've got more questions about differentiation, we'll get back to those. Thank you very much, Zoya. Right. So in the email that Vika sent you, it asked you to go back to the task which you had as part of the ENCOURSE, where you heard about 3 different approaches to assessment in mediation, right? So you had Stepan's approach, where he was asking them to grade their own confidence. You had Vasil's approach, where he was assigning one student to be the observer. And you had Svetlana's approach, where she was asking her students to write journal entries. Okay. So thinking about the future buildings exercise, which of these 3 approaches would you like to choose? I'm just going to give you 30 seconds. Just type it in the chat, because there's no right answer and wrong answer. So either write it down for yourself or type it in the chat. You can type the number. Two is really popular, actually. Select a student to be an observer. Okay. Okay. I said I'd only give you 30 seconds, so that's all right. As I said, there's no right answer or wrong answer. Let's look at some of the pros and cons, okay? So in terms of the self-assessment then, the teacher doesn't need to do any monitoring, and it's all first-hand knowledge. So, a lot of mediation comes down to things like understanding and sometimes feeling that you have been listened to and that you've been involved in a conversation, right? So first-hand knowledge of that is maybe better than what somebody can see by looking at you. Okay, and then also if you think about linking to previous knowledge, well, I think very often the students themselves are the best people to say whether they linked the conversation or used their previous knowledge in a task or a conversation. What are the cons? So it is an extra thing to think about on top of the language and the task in the lesson. If you do this, every lesson, you could imagine it's like a cake maybe, and it's like the middle layer is the task. When you come out of the task, you've got to have planning the report, then reporting, then maybe analyze the language, then analyze their task fulfillment, then analyze how well they mediated, and then they have to give themselves a grade as well. It might start to seem like a chore, like just one extra thing to think about. And it might not be popular because of that. And then, yeah, I put you're relying on the students to be honest, the ones who are unmotivated, maybe they prefer maths, they don't really like coming to the English lesson, so they might just say, give themselves 3 or 4 every day and not even really think about it. Okay. Let's go on to the next one, peer observation. What are the pros and what are the cons? So I think the advantage is every group will be monitored, because if you're the teacher, you can't really effectively monitor more than one group at a time, right? Whereas if you have peer observation, like we had in Vasil's example, everybody is being monitored at the same time. Also, the students who are monitoring might notice things that the students don't notice themselves, you know, strengths and weaknesses, really. Okay. What are the cons? I think the biggest disadvantage of this one is that whichever student is observing doesn't get the opportunity to take part in the task that day, right? So that's the main one. Also, can you rely on students in the class to be tactful? You know, like some people some people like to give this like sandwich method of feedback. Even if you've got something negative to say, try and find something positive to say, then say your negative feedback, and then say something else positive. But can you rely on teenagers in your class to be tactful like that? Lucky you if you can. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Okay. That's for peer observation. And then journaling. What are the pros, the advantages? I put it changes the pace of the lesson. It is generally a good idea to have a variation in how students interact, you know, high energy and low energy. So if you think about this building design lesson, maybe they've all been standing around a table discussing and designing their building, right? So that's quite animated. Then they're walking around the classroom, looking at the designs and talking to the one person who's there. So if you think about it, so if you were to finish this lesson with the journaling activity, it would be a change of pace. They'd be sitting at their desks thinking and writing rather than conversing and moving around as they have been already. It prompts more in-depth reflection. So you're giving them some time and space to reflect more. Okay. What are the disadvantages? It takes more time, and it might seem like more work. If the students, it could be that maybe they like the task-based learning thing, the mediation approach, and then if you give them the journaling, they might think, oh no, this is back to the sitting at the desk and writing in the book. We don't want to go back to that straight away. And then they might start writing repetitive answers. So I have actually encountered this problem myself. It might be that the students just see it as something to get it over with. So once they come up with an idea, for example, if they come up with an acceptable answer, or it might, you know, they might write on Monday, nothing, I couldn't have improved anything today. And then you come and check their journal and you say, you know, think about your answer. Because I'm sure if you think about it, you can think of something you could do better, right? And so on Tuesday, they write, well, I could have spoken more, I could have listened more attentively to the other people in my group. And then you say, okay, good, that's a good answer. Then they might say, hang on a second, I know what to write now so that the teacher won't complain about my answer. And they might just write the same thing on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay. Oh yeah, Lyubov, you maybe you've met the same thing. I can see your answer in the chat. Excuse me. All right, so there are some advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, and I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact, like, probably the teacher is the best observer, the best monitor, but the teacher can only ever monitor one group at a time, right? And I wanted to say that students, they do tend to expect feedback, and they might find it demotivating, for example, if they don't get a certain kind of feedback, right? So, for example, the one I put there is task fulfillment. Now, just to give you like a really simple example of this, what I've seen in a class, a teacher played a game with the students. It was just a game, like a simple game, like name as many fruits as possible, or name one fruit for each letter of the alphabet. And the students were playing in two teams, and then the game finished, and the teacher did not announce the winners of the game or let them have a round of applause, right? Some clapping, you know. And I think that the students much prefer it. For example, if you play a game, if you announce the winners and make a bit of a fuss of them, right? And it's the same if you do a task to acknowledge, have some acknowledgement in the class of successful completion of the task, you know. So you might be already thinking, oh, how am I going to guide my students to revise future forms? And then the other side of your head, you're thinking, how am I going to draw my students' attention to their mediation competencies? But it's also important to just say, you know, well done, you've successfully designed a building, and that would make a good fire station, and well done, you've come up with some reasoned arguments. And then I have also put, along with mediation, also language use. So, I mean, the way students understand what they are doing in the English class is mostly in terms of language, right? Being able to use the English language. So that's all I wanted to say. Whilst you give feedback on task fulfillment, and you're going to give feedback on their mediation competencies, and you're going to have them follow up and analyze that. Don't completely abandon referring to language, because I think students need to know when they're using language well, right? And you're the teacher, you're like the language expert in the class, right? So they're relying on you to let them know that they're using language well, or to, you know, correct them. I don't mean correct them like during the task, like you stop the task and say, no, your language is wrong. But I mean, you might pick out certain sentences and put them on the board and ask the students to repair them as a class. Okay, so those are some considerations then about assessment. About the pros and cons of assessment. Okay, so I'll take questions now. Has anyone got any questions they want to ask about assessment or differentiation? You can ask those as well. Oh, and I'll tell you what, just before we do that, like you can start typing your questions if you want, but I'd really like to do this before we finish as well. I want to make a word cloud, okay? All you've got to do, follow the instructions on the screen. If you've got your phone, what do students do in an English class? So open the camera app, point it at that QRIS, that barcode, tap the link and put in 3 things students do in an English class. I'll just leave it on the screen for another 30 seconds or so. Okay. I'm going to go back to the previous screen, but if you want to see that, whatever that thing's called, 2-dimensional barcode thing again, just tell me, I'll put it back. Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions. What about journaling in a multi-level classroom? Yes, I think I'll have maybe think about what I put earlier about the differentiation. So you could give them, for example, sentence stubs, like half-finished sentences. So instead of writing their answer free form, they could be like, you could give them the first half of the sentence and they could complete it, something like that. Hopefully that would make it more achievable. Another Olha said, can we use a chart of criteria to make self-evaluation more specific and effective? I would say yes, you could do that. Maybe, I think you have seen the CEFR companion volume. It's free access anyway. You could go there and have a look at the table for whichever mediation practice you are developing and pick out certain sentences or verb phrases, for if it's like so you might end up with a chart based on that. Did I invite others to give their ideas? Did I make sure everybody understood before moving to the next stage of a discussion? Did I ask someone to rephrase what they meant? You could certainly do that. I would say nothing wrong with doing that, but maybe at the other end of the spectrum, like what Zoya was talking about was instead of giving out roles, you could let the roles develop organically and then have the students analyze what roles developed organically. So it might be, Olha, that you start by making a criteria like this when you first start developing mediation competencies. But it could be that as you go through time, the students won't need the chart, and they can think for themselves about their own teamwork or about their own, multicultural, or about their own translation of a text, and what was it? Facilitating pluricultural space. That's what I was trying to think of. They could think for themselves how well they did it rather than relying on the chart. But yes, there's no problem with using a chart, Olha. Okay, Lyubov, so you've said, are we to differentiate marks for levels? Does it mean weak learners won't get high marks? Okay, it's a really interesting question because you could have, for example, students who know a lot of language but are not confident speakers, and then you could have students who are confident speakers but do not have a lot of knowledge of grammar and vocabulary, for example. So what do we mean by a weak learner? I think that to a certain extent, I mean, in theory, it is possible that a student who does not have a lot of knowledge of English could have relatively higher mediation skills relative to their knowledge of English, right? I mean, it is possible that you could, like, let's say if your learner's level of English is A2, it doesn't necessarily mean that their mediation, that the maximum level they can achieve for mediation is A2, but that's sort of theoretically. I think that in the same way that knowledge of vocabulary and grammar and speaking confidence are likely to sort of develop together, mediation is also going to develop at a similar pace. I talked a lot there, didn't I? I'm just trying to decide if I've... Now, I'm just trying to think, Lyubov, because there are certain mediation criteria where you would definitely need specific language, right? So, for example, if it says like mediating work in a group, invite others to share their ideas. Now, you could say, for example, Stepan, would you like to kick off? Would you like to tell us what you think? But maybe you could invite Stepan to speak just by saying his name and gesturing to him. Do you see what I mean? So that would sort of demonstrate a level of mediation without necessarily having very much language resource to call upon. What do you think, Lyubov? Are you satisfied with that, or do you want to ask anything else? Are there any other questions as well? There's only a couple, yeah.
So do you mean that means that we can put the highest mark to the learners who are still weak?
You can. I think theoretically you can, yeah.
Okay, probably that's it. Thank
you. Certainly for something like teamwork, I would say you can. Maybe for something like translating a text, it's not really realistic because you need quite a lot of language resource to attain the criteria for, like, you know, B2, C1, if it was one of those competencies.
Well, in the classroom, for example, when we assess our students, I do believe that very often we really put high grades to the students who have a desire, who participate actively, and not necessarily knowing all the vocabulary, all grammar rules, but they are understandable. They want to participate in the activity. They express their will. They express their understanding in probably not a perfect grammar, not with the pure refined vocabulary, but they are understandable. In the real world, it's not necessary to speak encyclopedia terminology. We speak in not very complicated word, and our communication means to understand and to be understood. And when the student does not know all the vocabulary which is considered to be learned, well, I put good grade to the student if he can communicate, if he can deliver what he wants to deliver to the audience, to another, to the listener, and he's understood in his maybe in a little bit not complicated and not very active, so far my seem concerned, or purely grammar word. So I think that it's rather good to lift up the assessment to that students who wants to do that, who does that, who is understood. And even today in the classroom, recently, some hours ago, I had such students and experienced such communication. I put a good mark even for not very complicated vocabulary, not very exact vocabulary, but they proved that they could speak, they could be understood in spite of. Well, thank you. That's my point of view. So, Lyubov, well, I do agree that students can get high marks, even not very advanced students. Why not? Thank you.
Thank you, Zoya. Yes, and you've said there as well, you said about grammar rules and refined vocabulary. Often mediation is not really, there's not a very strong link with language accuracy, right? So maybe if by a weak student, you mean a student who produces like language which is like grammatically not, doesn't suit the rules or like that, then yes, you can still give high marks. Just to jog my memory here, I'm looking at what you all call the pumpkin pages, right, in the book. And I see, for example, note-taking. I think you could get a high mark for note-taking without accurate English, because it serves a purpose, right? If you're watching a lecture or you're watching a documentary and you take notes, the purpose of the notes is to aid your memory when you try to remember what you wrote. So it doesn't matter if you write a grammatically correct sentence. It doesn't even matter if you have to write down some of the words in Ukrainian or your own first language because you couldn't remember the word in English, the purpose of the notes is to aid your memory. So if they aid your memory, despite the accuracy, then you have demonstrated the mediation competency. No reason it shouldn't be evaluated as having been successful. Now, on the other hand, I'm looking at the very first one on the pumpkin pages, which says relaying specific information. Now, this is one where if your sentence is grammatically strange, you might give the wrong information, okay? So, for example, word order is very important in English, and I think it's less so important in Ukrainian, right? What order you put the words in. So this is an area where if the students have made a grammatical mistake, they might not be relaying the correct information. Therefore, you couldn't really assess them as having successfully relayed specific information, if their sentence presented the wrong information. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your questions and for your contributions there. Before we end, let's just have a look at the word cloud you have created here. And there we go. What do students do in an English class? And yeah, can you, Vika, are you still there?
I am, surely.
Oh yeah, do like you did before, and could you do a screenshot of that and share it with us all, please?
Okay, of course.
Brilliant. Have you got anything you want to say, Vika, before we finish?
Yeah, just give me a moment to put this in the chat.
Okay, but yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody, for your participation in the end course. And as I say, hopefully there's going to be a resource pack of 10 lessons for you soon. And I hope if you've got your own ideas that you want to contribute, that we're going to find a way of everybody sharing their mediation-based lessons with each other. Okay. Because I know sometimes like you're used to opening up a textbook and seeing a presentation practice production style lesson, and so it can be difficult to know where to start, and it seems like it's going to take a lot of extra effort to do a task-based lesson on mediation, but I think if we share and collaborate, we can make it more streamlined, so make everyone's jobs easier and make some good engaging lessons for our students. Thanks very much, everyone.
Just a couple of words from me. I noted down everything that you left as questions in the chat box, and in case if Chris didn't have a chance to answer those notes, those questions, I'll pass them to Chris, and hopefully we'll get some Q&A document, let's say, and of course I will share it with you. I will share the recording as well, and perhaps we'll find the opportunity for another webinar, who knows. I will let you know about that as well. Thank you for being with us today. Despite all of the challenges with internet and of course with the tough situation in each region. And just to conclude our session, I want to wish you happy holidays. The semester is almost over, so I wish you patience with that, and of course, happy holidays ahead. Thank you. Thank you for joining.